Hello everybody, welcome back to the Apex to Apex podcast with your host me, Stanley Jones, where we discuss all things Formula 1 and MotoGP. Normally I say motorsport, but this time I just had to change it to Formula 1 and MotoGP because we are specifically focusing on those two topics. Now you might see something new with this one on the YouTube version is that I now have a camera, and you might see why am I looking here. It's because I find it weird to look at myself while doing this. However, this is where we are. This is now the development of the Apex to Apex podcast. Now, of course, I've changed the scheduling for how we do these podcasts. Normally, I released a episode on Monday or Tuesday, then another one on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on what's happening on the week. Well, now we have one on Thursdays, or I'm going to aim for Thursdays. Sometimes it might be a Friday, but let me off every now and again. I have other things to do around work. But now, what the schedule is we go from Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. If it was this week, it was Wednesday, because I went live yesterday. We will do a kind of live episode, kind of just chat on Twitch. As you know, we stream a lot of the race weekends, Formula 1 and MotoGP on Twitch anyway. And now I've decided, because I enjoy going live and talking about that and talking about motorsport with anyone involved in the chat, we go live early on in the week, and then we have the one episode later in the week, hence today. What is this episode, I hear you ask? This episode is going to be focusing on the Canadian Grand Prix weekend review that just happened and the MotoGP preview coming up for this weekend that is in Mugello. Now, Mugello is one of my favourite tracks, and that's going to be all things positive in MotoGP. But before, we have to talk about Formula 1, and that's a very painful discussion at the minute for me. So if we get straight to it, you might see every now and again I look at my phone, and you're going to see this on the stream, and I'll look at my phone because I have my notes. Go away. I have my notes here. I don't really need notes when I'm commentating specifically, but I have a certain format I do these podcasts in, and I look at the phone. You'll notice I've got a wheel here. I was thinking about streaming sim racing, but I don't like streaming gaming because I don't talk really when I'm sim racing. It's not fun for anyone, and it's not fun for me if I'm doing dreadful, which more often than not is the case. And yes, I'm still looking at the screen where I can see myself because it's still really weird. Anyway, what are the notes that I write down? See, we came into Canada, and if you watched or if you heard the review episode that went up on the Apex to Apex podcast Spotify account last week, I expected a Mercedes win, and I always expect a Mercedes win coming into these weekends now, and it was exactly that. We had the front row lockout in coming into the main race with George Russell on pole. We actually secured pole for the sprint race and the main race by just pipping Antonelli on both. And the main thing, yes, it was a sprint race. Yes, I said sprint race. It was a sprint race weekend, and everyone who knows me and knows this podcast now knows I don't like sprint races. They're dreadful. Get them out of the sport. But we had a sprint race in Canada. I don't know why. I don't know why they thought that would be exciting, but it's how they decided to do it. So then we got stuck in this situation where we had cars following each other, and because the cars were closed, people thought this was exciting racing, when the reality is it was dull and the same old sugar honey iced tea we've had all season, in my opinion. Shoot me. But you had the Mercedes out front. Yeah, both Mercedes out front. You had Antonelli initially leading Russell, then Russell leading Antonelli, and they swapped down the straights, not on the braking, down the straights. They swapped down the straights. Let's be sure we maintain that they swapped down the straights. None of the moves actually took skill. But there was one incident actually in the sprint race where Antonelli was going around the outside of Russell in turn 1, and Russell squeezed him. Pure and simple, ran the outside. This is one of the moves on the brake. This is the problem with these cars, and I always hesitate when I say this, but the problem is you're rarely going to see actual overtakes now on the brakes, because I said throughout the whole stream, Saturday and Sunday, the only time overtakes are going to happen with these cars is when mistakes happen for the driver in front, and that's exactly what happened. So you had Russell leading Antonelli coming out of the final chicane. Of course, you have the Wall of Champion chicane. You go through there. You go down the main straight. Antonelli's in the slipstream of Russell. Russell goes defensive, obviously. Turn 1, if you don't know, in Canada is a left, so Russell goes defensive. Anthony's around the outside. Anthony does risk it to brake later, and go around the outside of Russell. Russell very cleverly hits a little bump, I think. This is what I think he does. He hits a bump at the apex. You see the car bottoms out like that. And when he then hits the bump, his then reaction is to open the steering. But when you open the steering, Anthony's already there. And there's no debate that he's already alongside. He's more than enough alongside for this ridiculous debate of you need this car a certain width with the front axle. Right, Anthony's clearly there. And I think George Russell got very lucky here because he goes round the outside. Russell opens the steering and squeezes Antonelli on the outside. Antonelli has to go up on the runoff over the grass and come back on track. Now that was dodgy. That was really dodgy. And I think I did say it live on Twitch, and I'll say it again. I think if you put other drivers in that situation, other drivers get penalised for that move. I'm not going to name any names. Max Verstappen would have been penalised for that move, and everyone knows that. You can't deny that because we've seen it happen to him before. But Russell got away with it, and I found that is interesting. Why? Well, we never actually was given the reason properly why. They said, actually, I don't think I ever read the reason why he got away with it. It was noted, and then they didn't investigate it again. It's odd. But Antonelli was fuming on the radio, as you'd understand. He ended up finishing third, I believe, in the sprint race because Norris picked up second from this incident, and then Antonelli actually went off again in turn 8, catching Russell. Russell squeezed in. This one was Antonelli just braked too late, especially, and now he hit the brakes on a bump. So he had to go across the grass. He lost grip, lost time, dropped down to third. Norris did well, but the problem was the last 10 laps of that sprint race, or around about that, it was Russell, Norris, Antonelli, all nose to tail. If these were actual racing cars and good cars to drive, it would have been an entertaining race to watch. The problem is, it wasn't. They're just following each other because you can't overtake in these cars. I don't know where to look at the minute. There's so many things on my screen, and now there's you lot here. I'm just going to look you dead in the eye and say it. These cars are dreadful. We had 2 Mercedes and McLaren. Bear in mind, they're all Mercedes power units, and the way these engines run now, the engines they figure out when to deploy, and they all deploy at the same time. We know that. That's what's come out of these cars. That's why they're so beyond dreadful. So you had 3 Mercedes power units all in line with each other, all deploying at the same time, effectively. And when none of the drivers actually made mistakes on these last 10 laps, so none of the drivers could get close enough to make a move, so it was just a procession. People saying, oh, it was one of the best sprint races we've ever watched in Formula 1. I think that's an outrageous comment, because no sprint race has ever been entertaining with its natural events happening in the sprint race. Never. The air, I've said it before, the air doesn't move on a Formula 1 car. It doesn't change how it moves onto a Formula 1 car because there's less laps. But yeah, we were stuck with that. So that was the sprint race. So you had Russell won the sprint race, ahead of Norris, ahead of Antonelli. That's all we're going to say in the sprint race, because that's the top 3 done and dusted. I can't stand the sprint race. I really cannot stand it. So then we go into the main race, and you had Russell again on pole with Antonelli, and you had the McLarens second row on the grid, sorry. Similar to the sprint race, whereas the 4 rows were team lockouts. It was Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull. Kind of similar, but I think Hamilton was in 5th and Leclerc was down 8th, and the Red Bull's in between them, so it's almost the same. But you had this interesting situation where, I am checking the notes on my phone, you had this interesting situation where there was rumours of rain the whole time, because it's Canada, there's always rumours of rain, and most drivers starting on, you would imagine, on slick tyres, but the McLarens for some reason decided to go on to intermediates for the start. Why? That's the part I don't understand, is why would they go on intermediates? They made 0 sense, and it actually shows me that they haven't learned from their strategy mistakes last year, because it's well documented. McLaren were a disaster last year when it comes to strategy in the team orders. They just didn't know what to do and when to do it, and clearly they haven't learned a thing. Because why they were on the second row of the grid. I wrote down here, diabolical, especially when on the second row of the grid. They wouldn't have the pace to fight with the Mercedes. That's fair. No one does. The Mercedes is on another planet. Maybe it's illegal. We'll see after a ratio change. But I didn't say that. But they would have had the pace comfortably for 3rd and 4th. And Piastri had a nightmare afterwards, and Norris ended up breaking down. So it was a day to forget for McLaren, especially after Piastri. Well, again, I'm going too far ahead. You had this launch on the intermediates. Now, bear in mind, we had 3 attempts to start in the end. So you had the first start, which Arvin Lindblad, who again did a good qualifying to be in the top 10. Lindblad, I don't know what happened on the grid, another power unit failure, because these engines are dreadful. So we had more cars failing to start. I think in the sprint race we had 5 cars starting from the pit lane because they just couldn't get away. So it's, you can now see how much I'm going to roll my eyes when I speak about this sport in a minute. But you had this situation where the first start was abandoned. Anthony was lucky not to get a jump start. Yes, it was an abandoned start, but he did move quite clearly when the 5 red lights were still on, and then the 5 lights were on for what felt like 7 minutes, and no one knew what to do. And then eventually they had delayed the start, or aborted the start, and went again, got Lindblad off, and then when they came back round again to the second start, they were still rolling Lindblad off the grid. So then they had to do another delayed start, go around again, and then we got the launch. Now, I said on the stream, it's a classic karting trick when you have 1 lap to do something, and if you bolt on a set of wet tyres, or in this case intermediate tyres, the temperature's going to be there as soon as you launch on a slick track. So it wasn't a surprise to me to see Lando Norris lead into turn 1. He started 3rd, remember, but he was able to get the launch, getting both Mercedes cars going into turn 1. Not a surprise. Piastri struggled a bit. I think he bogged down to 4th or 5th, but that summed up Piastri, I think, throughout the entire weekend. But Norris did lead after the opening corners. What gets even weirder now is that they didn't pit in any of the delayed starts, where you could have, or in any of the, actually the second one I don't think you could, but in any of the opening lap. Piastri pitted in the first lap because they knew Piastri was on the radio saying, hey, this is probably the wrong choice now. So Piastri at the end of the first lap pitted, Norris didn't. So Norris kept the lead for another lap, but they were all on his rear wheel. Obviously, because it's a bone dry track and he's on intermediate, so he pitted. So that's then both McLarens at the points, and then a bit later on, Piastri went for this. He went down the inside of someone into the turn 10 hairpin. got it so wrong that he also had to try and overtake Albon in front of the car he was initially overtaking, and went into the side of Albon, ruined the side pod radiator, Albon out, Piastri damaged front wing, had to pit, so Piastri's day is done at this point. And of course he got given a penalty for it, as he should, because he did just T-bone Alex Albon. But that was the day for McLaren done. Norris did fight back to get to the lower end of the points, but then I can't remember what lap it was, but he ended up breaking down anyway. So absolute disaster for McLaren, and it goes to show they just haven't learnt a thing from the previous year. But when they were under more pressure, you could argue, last year, making those mistakes, they're not under the same pressure now, because they've proved they can win, and they are the winners. They are the reigning world champions in both drivers and constructors championships right now, and yet they're still doing these weird errors, and I find that just odd, very odd. You might see why I'm on my phone again, because I'm again getting the results up of the race, not the sprint race, because I'm going to ignore it happened. Another weird thing of the race that happened was it's one of the rare times, I think only the top 4 drivers weren't lapped. That is correct. Hadjar did finish 5th in the end, lapped, which is something. You don't see that very often. You might see the lower end of the points lapped, but not the top. Everyone went 5th below. Speaking of Hadjar, he did get a slap on the wrist and a book thrown at him. There was a time, where Leclerc was going down the back straight. I'm coming out of turn 10, down the back straight. Did whatever mode he had on, boost mode, overtake mode on, whatever it is, I don't care. On Hadjar, he's closing quite quickly. I think the speedo said he was going 210, 214 maybe. Goes to the right of Hadjar, and the problem is when he went to the right, Hadjar then also followed him, and that was a cheeks clenching moment. I think Leclerc did well to avoid him, because that could have been an airplane crash at that speed. And this wasn't due to, obviously he was catching due to the harvesting and the deploying, but it was scruffy from Hadjar. The race was scruffy from Hadjar actually. It wasn't. He looked more comfortable at the start of the weekend, and as the weekend kind of went on further and further, he looked less and less comfortable in that Red Bull. This was sums that up. It was just a move too late, too defensive of Leclerc. Leclerc, to avoid him, actually overtook him the following lap at the same straight. But of course Hadjar did get slapped with a 10-second penalty, and then had to serve another penalty later on in the race anyway, and still finished 5th. So that's how far ahead the leading cars are. But I've mentioned the race winners, so I will run down the race results very quickly. As I said, you do have Kimi Antonelli leading the championship still. He's now leading by a hefty lead, and you ask him, why has the lead got heftier and heftier? 1, he's putting George Russell to the side. That's fair to say, we can all see that. 2, George Russell ended up retiring from the actual race, because I think it was down to a battery failure. The battery just shut the whole car off. So Russell, while fighting Antonelli, was in the lead at the time, and suddenly the camera cut to Russell going across the grass at turn 8 and turn 9, and then you see him pull to the side of the track. And that's Russell gone. I think it was about halfway through the race, and everyone, from there it was clear it's Anthony's race, because they were already like 8 seconds ahead of the cars behind anyway at this point. And then you see Russell throw the headrest out, throw the buckle for the seatbelt out. I on stream I did say, go on, throw the steering wheel out, get that fine, just grab the wheel and lob it. And that's how much of a fine for that is nowadays. But you don't see it nowadays, because they know don't do that, because you get sacked on the spot. So he kept his calm, not for a steering wheel, but he threw the headrest. I think he got a £5,000 euro fine for those actions there, for endangering the marshals or something, but okay, fine. But yeah, so Russell ended up scoring nothing, so Anthony has increased that lead. So Anthony sits top of the leaderboard on 131 points, and George Russell is second now, still on 88 points. Only 13 points ahead of Charles Leclerc on 75. Hamilton is in 4th on 72. Now, before I talk into the real things, we do have to go through the actual order of what happened in the race, because the results are still important. So as I said, let's get this out of the way, then we can go into the real gossip, juicy gossip of what happened in the race itself. Antonelli won. Hamilton finished second. It was a good scrap between Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who, since Miami, of course, Red Bull made improvements, but Max struggled throughout the entire weekend with that Red Bull. And then it was a weird debate in the media, actually, between Max and the Red Bull, saying the Red Bull, they wanted Max to do a certain way in the setup to test some things, so Max agreed to do it, fully knowing and informing the team every time it's not going to work. We've tried this before. And of course the sprint race was a disaster for him. It was nowhere near, I think it was fighting around 5th and 6th the whole time. Qualifying, they were well off the pace. I think the first qualifying he qualified 7th, then I think the second one he was 6th, because Leclerc dropped down to 8th, so it was well off the pace. And the race suddenly seemed to find some pace in the race after what happened at the front. And he had that gap to Hamilton. Initially was about 8 seconds, but eventually got caught by Hamilton. And Hamilton for the last 20-25 laps was hunting down Max Verstappen. It was very old school what those two were doing. And I was intrigued to see, because these drivers were not going to make a mistake, and I was intrigued to see how the overtake would happen. Because earlier on in the race, the reasons why they were inverted before is Max actually made a move on the brakes, shockingly enough, on the brakes into turn 1. And the reason why I mention this move specifically is because you can see the straight line mode, the wings are shut as soon as they come off the throttle alone. I thought it was like DRS when you hit the brake and the wing comes down. No, when they come off the throttle is when the wings shut, and you can see when the wings initially shut, Max is just starting to make the move. So it's a move on the brakes into turn 1, and Hamilton caught him by surprise, and he stayed there for the majority of the race, and then the last 20-25 laps, Hamilton found that extra bit of speed while Max was in a lonely second at this point. Closed the gap from, I think, 7.5 to 8 seconds to Verstappen, caught him, and then you wondered how would this move work, because it's quite clear you need quite a lot of pace in hand, because the driver said it in the cooldown room. The slipstream now with the boost overtake is so strong, it's very difficult to break that 1 second gap. And Hamilton got within that 1 second gap and was there for quite a few laps, because at this point Max is now trying to deploy where he can to defend if the engine allows him to. And Hamilton followed him into out of turn 10 down the straight, going to the final chicane, and it made the move into turn 1. Max did go defensive into turn 1, but, and this is the problem, all the people saying great overtake, it was a good scrap between them, watching them do the lap times they could do. Bear in mind, Hamilton, I reckon, was about half a second a lap quicker than Max at this point. The move wasn't on the brakes, okay? You see on the onboard, Max's rear lights are harvesting halfway down the main straight. And he goes defensive, because at this point he's going to try and keep second and do what he can. But Hamilton's got the move done, but even before the braking zone. I think the speed they approached there made it look like it was a late braking move around the outside. It wasn't. It was a harvesting plus his deployment move. It just happened to be coming into a brake zone. Welcome to 2026 Formula 1, everyone. Love it so much. Anyway, Hamilton did that. Hamilton got the lead. Hamilton got second. Max was able to stay in his 1 second gap, but didn't have the pace to make a move on him. No chance. But was able to stay in the slipstream within that overtake boost thing. But they finished up second and third. Hamilton finished second. I think the gap to Antonelli in the end was 10.7 seconds. Antonelli, who was setting fastest laps for fun. That's how far ahead that Mercedes. He did the fastest lap on the last lap of the race as well, just to get it just over 10 seconds. The gap, Hamilton 10.7 behind. Max Verstappen did cross the line, just half a second behind Hamilton, and Leclerc a further 30 seconds behind. Then Leclerc suffered a very odd incident after one of the virtual safety cars, where he came back on the throttle coming out of the last chicane and did a half spin. I mean, it was a very good save from him, but it was one of those weekends where Leclerc just isn't there, and I expected at some point the camera to cut to Leclerc in the wall. Didn't happen, but he almost did at this point, where he kept the half spin, full lock coming out, corrected it, got going again, but at this point he lost another 5-6 seconds out of recovery. It was nowhere near the front. I did find it odd, however, that the reason why the fights between the Mercedes drivers was so close in the first half of the race before Russell's retirement, again, it was because of driver mistakes, not because of pure skill and pure pace. Driver mistakes. Both Mercedes cars kept locking their front right at turn 10. Every other lap you'd see one go. I think Russell went off twice in the runoff, and Antonelli, I think, went off twice or 2 or 3 times in the runoff, all at turn 10, which then, of course, gave the one behind the run down that long back straight, which is why the race was close coming into the chicane. But they've used the boost for going down the chicanes, and then they couldn't do it into turn 1, so they have to move that up into the chicane. It wasn't going to happen into 1. But I found that odd. I don't know why drivers, especially the Mercedes drivers, were struggling so much under braking at turn 10. Maybe it's to do with the lack of downforce initially under braking, because they had the straight line mode active coming from turn 9 to turn 10. Maybe there's a bump they kept hitting right on the braking turn. I don't know, but that was odd. That was also, this is where they deceive you. That's why the racing on the clips looks good, but the reason why they're coming down that back straight nose to tail every time is because the one in front was making these mistakes. And that's where I really struggle to find the entertainment aspect of what's happening now. Is the racing was not pure, it wasn't natural, it was manufactured. Yes, is what I believe from what these engines are doing, but at the same time, when you have to wait for an overtake purely from a mistake from the one in front, I don't quite see the enjoyment of that. The drivers are not pushing to the limits. I think the commentators were saying, watching Hamilton and Verstappen go at it, when I think at this point Verstappen's now behind Hamilton, and you can say the drivers are pushing, yes. You could see they were starting to leave black lines on the corners exit and they're drifting a little bit, especially going out of turn 4, close to that exit wall on the right. But it's the drivers are on a limit, not their limit. They're on a limit of what their car they're in Verstappen's case, the tractor he's in, and kind of Hamilton's case, of what that car can do, and they're not on the limit of what they can do, because these drivers can push so much more than what they're able to right now, and that is something that really grinds my gears every time you watch it. So yes, when the commentators would, obviously their job is to try and big up what's happening, and the media are doing a great job at making sure the race sounded spectacular. It really wasn't. Like, it really wasn't. And I don't like how restricted the drivers are, but anyway, I don't make the rules. This is what we're stuck on. I will say a big up to Franco Colapinto, who is, I think it's fair to say, as every race goes on, actually, especially end of last season coming into the start of this season, he's really made leaps and bounds forward. I don't know what Briatore's given him or what Briatore's done, but Briatore's done something, because Colapinto has been fantastic, frankly, in every opportunity he's had. This day he got 7th last round, but gave him his best result in Formula 1, and this weekend he was 6th. But when I say 6th, he was a lonely 6th the entire time. I think it was a very, very good performance from him that won't do any harm for his name whatsoever. The only blip he had, I believe, was when he pitted. And of course, I can show you now with the camera, and that's funny. So when you come out of the pits for Canada, you come out this way. Of course, turn 1 comes here, turn 1 there, and then turn 2's there. The pit exit leads you out here into right on the midpoint and exit of turn 2. So Colapinto came out on these brand new cold hard tyres and turned right, and the car went straight, and there was a moment where, I mean, I say he's going to hit the wall, he did hit the wall, and he hit the wall actually quite hard, considering the position he's in, at quite an angle, and he's very fortunate. He only got a little scrape on an end plate on his front wing, and I think he was very fortunate not to get suspension damage or steering damage from there, because he hit the wheel almost not side on, but at that horrible angle where it can rip the wheel from the suspension. He got lucky there, but with the performance he was doing throughout the whole weekend, he kind of, the racing gods kind of, I think, gave him this one. He deserved to get lucky in that situation. And also it was a double points finish for Alpine, because Gasly finished the points as well, finishing in 8th, and you might ask who's 7th, that was Liam Lawson, who did like a 35 lap stint on the soft tyres, and managed to stay ahead of Pierre Gasly with the laps ticking down at the end. So it's a hell of a drive from Colapinto and a hell of a drive from Lawson as well. Gasly, at this point, you kind of expect him to be around there because he's been consistent. I say he's been consistent. Was consistent for the first few rounds. I think the last 2 or 3 races he's been off the boil a little bit, maybe as Colapinto's come forward, which is a fascinating dynamic that's happening there at Alpine now, and what direction Briatore is going to want to go in. Bearing in mind, next year, Alpine's title sponsor is going to be Gucci, as the whole team in livery is going to change, and they're going to be funded with a lot more money. So that's going to be interesting. I do think they're going to slightly favour Colapinto, because he's the youthfulness and the style of him. And you have to remember, Briatore, if he's still going to be the advisor, whatever that means for Flavio Briatore, he's going to be the advisor for a team sponsored by Gucci in fashion, and Briatore's life before Formula 1 was fashion. Hence why Benetton hired him. So that's fascinating. That'll be interesting to see where Alpine go. But just finishing up the points position was Carlos Sainz and Ollie Bearman, 9th and 10th. You didn't really see much of them on camera, really. I think Bearman was on camera maybe once as he slipped across the grass from turn 8 and turn 9. And Piastri ended up finishing 11th, 2 laps down on the leaders. I don't need to mention the likes of the Audis. I don't need to mention the likes of the Aston Martins. I'm sure you can guess what happened. Apparently Alonso stopped in the first quarter of the race because of pain in his back. And apparently he's been racing with this blow-up pillow, essentially, right on the bottom left of his seat, which clearly wasn't working, and he pulled in quite early actually to retire from the Grand Prix. So it's still nightmare for Aston Martin, a nightmare for Cadillacs. Bottas ended up being 4 laps down. I don't know how you can make an excuse for that or a reason. I know they're a new team on the grid, but 4 laps is pathetic, frankly. Perez, at the other Cadillac, I will say, didn't finish the race because his front left decided to... Or was it his front right? No, his front right, sorry. Decided to depart from his suspension. I think he clipped a wall and we were never shown the replay. It was either that or a suspension failure coming down the straight. But you could see halfway down the straight it kind of went to an angle, and his steering was like this, kind of like that halfway down the straight. So you knew something was up. I initially thought he did clip the wall, maybe coming out of turn 9, which would have been on that right hand side. But then under braking when he was pitting, it just bent in 45 degrees. That was Perez's day done. The Cadillac's day done. No points for them. No points for George Russell, which again is the biggest talk in the championship fight happening right now. But the sad thing is for this weekend is... And again, this race review, I'm going to try and do it a bit differently because it's review the race, but also it's going to be my opinions on how I'm doing it, less inside knowledge or pretend to have inside knowledge and just go from a fan's perspective. I don't like these races. Even if people claim it's entertaining, this probably was the most entertaining race we've had this season, but it's not racing. It so goes against everything we know and what I know of racing itself. And when you even have the drivers saying it and you're watching the drivers not be on the limit of what they can do, it's painful. I mean, I did the 2 live streams. I said I live streamed the sprint race and the main race Saturday and Sunday, and I called them both the hate watch because it was fun. When I commentate MotoGP, I take it more serious because I'm into it every lap they're doing. The Formula 1, I can't at the minute. It's too difficult to try and take serious because of my just disdain for it. So I called it a hate watch, and it was quite a fun stream because we had a few people in also hate watching what was happening, and I think I banned the word batteries in the chat, which was clearly needed. Just before we end the Formula 1 talk, before we move into the MotoGP discussion for the Mugello preview, I will say about the dynamics in the team is interesting at this point in the season. Because if you remember back to last year, this was the weekend when the McLarens came together, when they were dominating, where Norris and Piastri came together down that main straight, and Norris retired from the race. And we almost got that aspect, or that recreation, from the Mercedes boys into turn 1, especially on the sprint race. And a couple of times, I forgot one thing in the race when Russell passed Antonelli down the straight, and Antonelli did this odd thing of, instead of braking... the moves would have been done at this point. You're not going to outbrake him into that chicane. So Antonelli decided to then go back straight right behind Russell's car, fully in the dirty air. It must have been centimetres between Russell's rear exhaust rear exhaust, like there's multiple, but you get the point. And Antonelli's front nose. And of course, when you're that close to a Formula 1 car and the braking with the dirty air, you're going to lose all front downforce. Think back to Ricciardo and Verstappen at Baku 2018. The reason why that happened is because Verstappen hit the brakes right behind Ricciardo, lost all the front downforce. And Antonelli did lock up and somehow avoided the back of Russell's car and had to go off in the runoff and skip the chicane. How he avoided Russell's car, no idea. Initially, I was like, that was close. But then when they showed replays, I realised that's all on Antonelli because he should have known. I don't know why he dipped back. If it was halfway down the straight, yeah, of course, dip back into the slipstream. But when you're about to go on the braking, you're openly going that close behind. If that was the place where... If there's any place where they were going to touch, it would have been there. And it was a couple of times. There was another moment, I think a lap or two later into the same chicane, where they didn't touch, and again, Anthony ran over the chicane. This part is entertaining because... Yes, okay, they're racing in a way, but it's also because it's messy, it's scrappy, and we enjoy that. I enjoy that, especially when it's in between teammates going for the championship. I always enjoy that dirty side of it. And they will touch at some point, and it will get dirtier and dirtier. I think Anthony also showed he will just attack Russell at every angle he can, and Russell needs to deal with that. And at the minute, Russell's not dealing with it. Wasn't his fault his car broke down, but I don't think he would have held Antonelli back anyway. But the takeaway I will take from the Canadian Grand Prix was it was good to see Hamilton v Verstappen again. Again, it was probably Verstappen's best drive. Didn't really make mistakes, getting the first podium in what is a track 2 of a Red Bull. And I don't see Verstappen staying at Red Bull long, especially with what he says in the media about the team going one way with the setup or wanting to try this. And Verstappen's adamant and knows it's not going to work. And it seems like once again the team are kind of favouring the data and simulation answers rather than the best driver in the world's answers. And it happened last year, and it's happening again what seems to be this year, and I don't think Max will put up with that at this point. But what I will say this again, one final thing before we go into the MotoGP discussion, because Formula 1 annoys me intently. It seemed initially they agreed next year to do the 60-40 ratio of the engine, because they're 50-50, if you don't know the combustion and the electric, that's what I'm going to call it, combustion and electric. 50-50 ratio split right now. Pathetic. Get it out of the sport. Get hybrids out of motorsport in general, thank you. It would be my one wish if I had one. But it seemed like they did agree for a 60-40 split next season to go back in terms of the combustion. If it's true, and these teams have spent all this money going from the 50-50 split, if you don't know, what it was from 2025 and before was a 65-35 split. So I do understand why some teams who are doing okay are against that, because they put all their money and resources into these engines for the split to change. And it sums up the FIA did an awful job with these regulations. But also the racer and the Formula 1 lover in me hopes they change these regulations back. It'll also mean Verstappen will stay on the grid, because I'm adamant if it stays at 50-50, he will not be there. He will leave, he will race GTs, he'll do Le Mans, which also will be entertaining. But more and more drivers will start doing that and have their interest away from Formula 1 because they're frankly awful. Even Hamilton said after the race, it doesn't feel natural. You're going down the back straight after turn 10, and when you're going to the higher gears, the engine should be pulling, building those revs and screaming down the end of that back straight, not reducing the revs halfway through the straight. And just to annoy me even more, I decided this is my fault because I decided to watch a certain video from the pole lap of last year and compared it to this year, both George Russell. And what annoys me is the upshifts, how early their upshifts are now to not use full revs to save some battery for later on. And I think into turn 10, Russell started lifting off at the 250 metre board. The year before, by the way, he was hitting the brakes at around 70 metres on the limit, and now they're having to upshift. They come out of, I think, turn 6. Oh, sorry, you short shift the third anyway from second, and it's second, third, and you build the revs and go up. But now it's second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and then you lift off, and it's pathetic. I cannot stand it. That's Formula 1. Every review for Formula 1 is going to be like this. There's not going to be a structure for my rants to Formula 1. It's just going to be rants. Anyway, we now go into MotoGP, and you can see I'm much more energetic. I'm much happy to talk about MotoGP, as it is returning to Mugello. Now, Mugello is one of two of my favourite tracks. One of two? Yeah, that makes sense. One of two of my favourite tracks in MotoGP. The other one being Phillip Island, which the fact that they're getting rid of that off the calendar after this year is beyond shambolic. And there's going to be... As soon as there's a weekend where there's no races, I'm going to do a diabolical rant on Liberty Media, how they're ruining Formula 1, and they're going to try and ruin MotoGP, in my opinion. They are a disease, I think, to motorsport. And with the I said in the podcast recently that they're going to try and kill a rider. Clearly what they're doing. Going to an Adelaide street circuit instead of Phillip Island is pathetic. Anyway, we're at Mugello, and I love Mugello. So the track of Mugello, let me get the corner names up, because I like doing these little reviews of the track itself. And Mugello is one of those where The top speed they're going to hit probably this season will be at Mugello, going down that main straight. Mugello, so I don't know how long this main straight is, but it's over a mile long, I reckon, or probably around that. But the bikes will hit around 225 miles an hour. And then that's just not going straight across. The undulations like this, they come over the start-finish line. They'll dip right a little bit, and there's a big hill in the middle, a bump that goes up this, and there's times where the wheel can come off. But they're keeping it pinned full revs, 225 miles an hour, breaking into one, which I think it's called San Donato. See, I do know about it. San Donato is a... Oh, how do we name or describe San Donato? It's a 180, so it's a hairpin, but it's an extended hairpin, effectively. It's not really that tight, but moves will be made there, and you can run wide. The only benefit of running wide from San Donato, so you come this, San Donato's here. The only benefit of running wide is you can get the cutback here. But you don't even need the cutback because turn 2 is then a left-hander. So we have a couple left rights coming up. If you can get the exit of turn 1, San Donato, spot on, you will have the line for turn 2, which is just the right-hander, which then quickly goes into a flip-flop left to right. All going uphill at this point now. We're coming back. After we go over the bump of the straight, we go downhill braking San Donato, coming back up the hill now. You come out of that right-hander turn 3, they're going to use the exit curve, and you're going to see the bikes just drop down when the ride-height device comes on. As soon as that goes, they come back to the right side of the track for turn 4 and 5, which again is similar to turns 2 and 3. Left under braking, and then quickly right again. I think it's actually a shorter distance between 4 and 5 as it is 2 and 3. Same aspect, right side of the track, under braking. Again, moves will happen into turn 4. We saw it last year. I think Mark got... Pecco, this move, a beautiful move on the inside, and then you keep the roll for turn 5, the right hander, and then again they're going to use all of that exit curve on the left, and you can see at this point, if you looked right in the distance, you can see turns 8, 9 and 10 coming up in the distance, because you know you're going to drop now downhill on corners called Casanova, which is turn 6. I am looking at the images for names, come on, I don't know that much. Turn 6 now, they're going to try and clip, probably with their knee they're going to clip that inside curve at turn 6, and it's a third gear, maybe 4th gear. I'd say 3rd because it's at speed still. You carry the momentum, and what's going to happen is when they come into Casanova, they're coming out with drastically back downhill, but the bike is going to swift to the left of the track. Switch to the left of the track because of the momentum they're carrying. And as soon as they're going downhill trying to get the bike back to go right, they have to flop it left for turn 7, which is called Cervelli. I'm not going to call it calling names because... Oh, I will call Aprilia 1 and Aprilia 2 because that is turn 8 and 9. So we're going on turn 7. The riders have now got the bike fighting to get it back to the right side of the track to flip it left again for turn 7. You're now back at the bottom. You're not going to go any more downhill. You now got to climb the hill up again. Because of how they've come into turn 7, flipping the bike back, they're going to again use the momentum to use all the exit track they can on the exit turn 7. But now they have to kind of stay to the middle of the track, but some of them are able to quickly get the bike from the right side of the track on the exit to 7 all the way to the left side of the track to quickly lean in at 4th gear, Aprilia 1. Now Aprilia 1 is a long right hander like that, but it comes back uphill to the peak now. You're coming to the highest point of the track for Aprilia 2. So they lean in like this. They're going to have a little bit of moment. They can not straighten up but get their breath before they lead in for a blind Aprilia 2. You cannot see over the apex because of how the hill works. And you go into their 4th gear, maybe 3rd gear to clip it down and build the revs up. But when you're coming Aprilia 2, you bump up. And again, they're going to use the exit curve that's on the left-hand side. You can see the weight of the bike and the weight of the rider's body kind of go up like in a roller coaster because you can't see what's above the hill. Now you come over the hill, back down the hill again for turns 10 and 11, which again, similar to 2 and 3, is a right. This time you're going left to right, they're going right to left. Break down the hill. This is why it's tricky. You'll see a lot of riders tend to lose the front of this one. Some can save it, but we've seen people like Márquez has crashed here over the years before because they're using and they're abusing so much of the front tyre and the front braking to get... You have to be greedy here. You have to get that front tyre of that bike to kick into this corner because it's downhill. You're carrying the speed from the two Apriatas, so the momentum is with you with the bike fully. You're not slowing down really at this point. And when you're hitting the brakes on the braking, you feel like you're really not slowing down. So you have to be greedy with the front end of the bike. Clip the right hander, again flip-flop it to the left. Use all the exit curve going out the left hander, and again you're going uphill just slightly. Again, a similar blind entry coming up because you're going to hit the brakes just after you go over the brow of the hill into the next long right hander, which is similar to turn 1. Turn 12, not even going to try and pronounce it, but you remember what turn 1 was like. Turn 12 was like that, but instead of coming downhill, you're now braking downhill, so you brake on the brow of the hill, mainly braking downhill, but trail braking as the corners coming like this, round. The difference is you don't want to let the bike drift to the left part of the track. You'll see crashes here as well because of the nature of how downhill it is under braking and on corner entry. you'll see riders lose the front. But you don't want to let the bike drift to the exit, because you need to keep the bike on this side of the track, purely because the next two corners are the quick left and right. We've seen moves here over the years, especially if you remember back to the 2016 MotoGP race. You had Lorenzo and Márquez, flip-flop between there. I think Lorenzo got Mark into the left, Mark then cut back, got Lorenzo to the right. These are fast corners. The riders will use as much inside curb as they can here, along with the outside curb. Left, flip it right, use the outside curb. Now you can go pin the throttle, you can go full speed, let the bike drift to the right for the braking for the last corner, turn 13. I will get the name for this one. I won't, I can't pronounce that. Again, you're on the... Is it under braking downhill? I think it's a little bit, but you're braking more before you lean in. Again, it's trail braking. It's where you see a lot of riders. Again, Márquez, he's crashed at every corner. But Zarco has also dropped it here. But the difference with the last corner is, imagine turn 1, you go right to left. This one is now left to right. You're carrying still speed coming out the previous chicane. I'm going to call it a chicane, but it's a high speed one. And you're trail braking downhill. And it's so easy to let the front just drift, and it gets on the dirt and then falls. We've seen it on corner entry. We've seen this here on mid corner. So if you go too wide, you will just drop. And we've also seen it weirdly on corner exit when you pick the throttle back up again. But there's different lines here. So let's say the corner's like this, okay? You can either have a wide entry, so you're basically aiming for an invisible apex on the exit. Because remember, the exit goes onto that long main straight. You need the momentum. You need the exit. You need to go wide on the exit to be able to build the speed onto this straight, which again comes up downhill. You see the anti-wheelie really kick in to keep the bikes down. But you need to keep the speed up for the exit, so you can either have a wider entry and spot that invisible apex. Some riders like to stay tight and keep that inside curb in their sight. That, if you're defending, that's going to be the routine you take. And some people mistakenly run wide late on into the corner, which again affects their run into the main straight. But you're all going to see, and they're all going to spot an apex themselves. Some might be different places. Majority is one is going to be the kind of delay on the entry, to make sure you don't fall, because the bike will chatter as they lean in. But they're all going to spot an invisible apex for the exit, because they all need the exit onto that main straight to be perfect. They go onto the main straight, they pin the throttle, you tuck in as much as you can, you go back across the line. A lap of Mugello, one of my favourite tracks. And the big news for this weekend is, obviously we're missing Zarco and we are missing Alex Márquez because of the events from the Spanish Grand Prix. They are both injured. Zarco is being replaced by Crutchlow. That's a name I haven't heard for a very long time. Crutchlow raced, if you don't know, for MotoGP for many years before. And I don't remember the year he retired, but it must have been about 2022, maybe 2023. Around then, but he's not been on the MotoGP bike for, I think it's 22. I want to find an answer to this because I'm intrigued. Because I find it such an odd pick, because he's going to be the most race rusty he's ever been in his life. He is also 40 years old now. It might have been 2020 he retired. That's interesting. I thought it was 2021. Did he retire in the COVID year? I like I'm saying it's like someone can answer me right now. He did. He retired in 2020. Of course, he's made a couple one-off races since then due to injuries and that, but he hasn't been on the MotoGP bike and raced it since 2023 for anything whatsoever. But Crutchlow is back for this weekend. Now, he used to race at LCR Honda for 5 years between 2015 and 2020. That's really the team he's most known for. It's funny that he's back. And we got Colapinto, Pirro, of course, filling in for Alex Márquez. But the biggest return is if it goes ahead. He's passed the first fitness test, and then they'll review after FP1 to decide fully if he can race on the bike, is Marc Márquez. Now, you might recall Márquez had the big crash in the Le Mans sprint race, and he got the bolt removed from his shoulder. That's been nagging on his nerve, which has been affecting him. He got a little surgery done on his foot as well from the crash in Le Mans, and he opted to miss the Le Mans main race on the Sunday, and he missed the Catalonia Grand Prix. He is back this weekend, and I'll tell you this now, if he is in a fit and fighting condition, I really hope this is the first time this season we see the actual Marc Márquez on what that Ducati can do, because none of the other Ducati riders can get that bike to prove the maximum of what it can do. Márquez can. Marc Márquez, without a doubt, 100% can do that. He's proved it last year, and he'll prove it this year if he's back fighting fully fit. And the question is, if he comes back fully fit and can compete with Aprilia and beat Aprilia, I do think Aprilia will then start to panic, because all they're going to be doing there is looking behind them of where Márquez is. They're already kind of going off the boil slightly. They were a bit quiet they were frankly dreadful actually in Catalonia. It was the first time this season we saw weakness in the whole Aprilia team in general, with Martin crashing 5 times, 6 including the test just after, Bezzecchi nowhere in the qualifying, nowhere in the sprint. Lucky in the race to get where he did, because everyone else dropped off in front of him. But one thing Aprilia do not want, they've probably got some internal politics going on with Martin anyway, with the Yamaha move and his drama with Raul Fernandez. What Aprilia do not want is, they do not want to be having to look where Marc Márquez is on track, and if he's behind him, they don't want to see him when he comes past him, because they won't catch him. And if it's going to be fascinating if Mark's fit enough, because it's also where we're going to gauge where that Ducati bike is and what it can do. If he is fit enough, and only he will know. And the thing is with Mark, you can tell when he's riding if he's fit by how he's doing certain corners. You can really see it. If he's fully fit enough and he cannot compete with the likes of the Aprilias, or maybe I'd say Gracini, but Márquez isn't there, so we have to see who's going to compete with Aprilia. Really, it's hard to think anyone apart from a Ducati competing with the Aprilia this weekend where it can go. Pecco Bagnaia, I imagine, will be fast. He was one of his best rounds last year, and what's a disaster season for him was Mugello. It's his home Grand Prix. You know, he's loved there. He's Italian on Ducati. He'll be competitive as well, so they're going to rely on him at the same time if Mark cannot perform. I have a sneaky feeling Mark really can. He did arrive to the grid today with a boot still on his foot, but that's nothing for these boys. That's the impressive thing about them. They can do that any time of the week and get on a bike and rag the hell out of it. And yes, so the process is they'll have a... if you wonder where I'm looking, this is how my brain works. I'm looking at you sometimes, and I look at everything else as I'm speaking, like I'm a weirdo. But again, for those on Spotify who aren't on the YouTube video, you're going to think, what is he on about right now? Hi, we're also on YouTube, Apex to Apex podcast on YouTube with a FaceCam now, and also the FaceCam will appear on the Twitch streams. We'll plug it again at the end. Because now I forgot what I was saying before. I slated the Safety Commission of MotoGP in one of the podcasts previously. The preview actually from Catalonia. Slated it because it was utterly dreadful what they're doing right now, I think, and the lack of care they have for the riders. And Mark said that today, that they're expecting too much from the riders. Far too much from the riders. What they do, effectively, when a rider comes back injured, they'll do a review or a test beforehand. I don't know what goes on in these tests. I don't think it's a very thorough one, considering they can all race with a broken leg. Look at Firmino Aldeguer, who is racing with a broken leg still. They'll do a little review before the weekend starts on the Thursday to see if the rider can get on a bike, I think. If he can get on a bike, yeah, sure, go out on track and race, mate. And then after free practice 1, the first session of the weekend on the Friday morning, they'll compete that, and then if they'll do a review after that session, where the rider effectively then decides, I can do it or I can't do it. Most riders are obviously going to say, yes, he can do it, let's be honest, and I think Mark's going to be no different, so I do expect Mark to be on the grid. Mark's also a bit more safety concerned or safety aware of his body now, of course, with the injuries he's gone through over the years. But I fully expect Mark to be there. I don't think it's a thorough safety test anyway, which sums up the MotoGP commission that I'm even saying that or thinking that. It is what it is in that world, though. So join them when you can. Again, the Twitch handle is Apex to Apex Pod. The Instagram account, which I also use mainly, that's the main one, that and Twitch. Apex to Apex Podcast on Instagram, Apex to Apex Podcast on Spotify, and Apex to Apex Podcast on YouTube as well, of course. Make sure you follow each one, subscribe to each one, do whatever you want for each one. Just interact and get involved. That's all we're looking for here, is just interaction and get fans speaking about motorsport where their opinions aren't shut down, and you can say whatever you want. Anyway, thank you for listening to this one. I will see you soon for this weekend streams. Again, it's MotoGP. We'll have the live stream for the sprint race on the Saturday and the live stream for the main race on the Sunday. And I'll leave you with the punchline of this podcast as normal, which is the race is just a punctuation. Thank you.